Oh my God, it all worked. It all worked. That was nice. That was good. All right. That's all I really wanted. That's really why I went live. I wanted people to see it. All right. I'm getting all of my windows in order and my comment sections. I'm live on the TT now. Hey, TikTok. Hey, the talk of the town. I don't actually know. I don't really know how the TikTok stuff works. Not gonna lie, but we're gonna see. Oh no, I mean I know how TikTok works. I guess I don't know how it works with like me seeing the comments on TikTok. So there's that. What if we like go into my live on TikTok? Maybe that could. I don't know. Let's just hope that it works. Can you? Okay, yeah. My mic's on. All right. So I'm live on Facebook. I'm live on YouTube. I'm live on TikTok. That's all well and good. Okay. Jimmy. Yes. Actually, it's not Frame Shifter. My intro music is just by my husband. So, which I mean, I guess he writes a lot of the music for Frame Shifter, but the intro music is just something that my husband wrote for me last year when we tried to do some. I really wish I could figure out how to see my comments on TikTok. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa. No, so the intro music is not Frame Shifter. It is something that he wrote for me last year when I was doing some YouTube stuff, and I was super, super excited to be able to use it for something else because it's awesome, isn't it? It's so, so cool. I love it so much. I'm trying to figure out, like, I don't really know. I wish I could figure out how to see. I don't know. I wish I could figure out how to see live comments. So, sorry, TikTok. If I can't see your live comments, then there's that. I don't know. I'll figure that out. I'll figure it out at some point, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. We'll figure that out. That's for another day. If you're on TikTok though, cool. Thank you so much. I do these lives bi-weekly, but this is like a special. I had a new intro and I wanted to show you live. So, but also we did a poll about maybe like a little surprise live. What did you guys want to talk about? And what won was experiment variables. So to set up a sort of like well-rounded experiment when you're doing paranormal investigating. And this is a method that you can use right away. So you don't have to fully apply the scientific method. So if you're just in the observation stage, this is a really great way to facilitate that observation stage and to try out different techniques and different possibilities when it comes to setting up your experiments and maybe looking into more ways that you can figure out some new theories or anything like that. So that's what we're going to talk about. Hey, wherever you are, let me know where you are. Where are you? Are you on Facebook? Are you on the YouTube? Where are you? Because the hardest part about these lives is like figuring out where everybody is. So who knows? But I digress. Okay. So we're just going to get right into it because I don't want this to be 3 hours long. And if you know me, I don't have an agenda. So we're just choosing chaos today. So wherever you are, give me a hello, give me a follow, things like that. I really wish that I could see the TikTok comments. that would be so cool. But this is also too, I don't want this. I don't want this. There's like so much noise happening. Okay, I'm going to digress. I'm going to try to go into this. My mute is off. Yeah, I don't know. I can't see any of the comments on TikTok. Oh my God, I hate it so much. Let me make this big. I'm just going to take a gander here. Oh yeah, okay. So there is, okay, cool. If you're on TikTok, I can see them. God, why do I feel like such an old lady sometimes? Probably because I am one. All right, let's get into it. Everything's up. I can see it all. I can see clearly now, the TikTok's up, but I can't really see the Facebook comments. Man, and the hard part is it's like a learning curve. Like you can't really do much until you're actually live. All right. Let's do it. Let's get into it. All right. So let's talk about experiments. I have a notebook here, and if you have a notebook, it's kind of easier to visualize when you're setting up an experiment to have like an example in mind. So for all intents and purposes, everybody typically does in the past use the Estes method. So the Estes method was what I wanted to base our example experiment on. Now, there are some things that we have to take into account when we're using the Estes method. So we'll take all of those things into account when we're planning the experiment, and we'll kind of have checks and balances for the different things because we want to make sure that these things are accessible for everybody to go out and to be able to try them. And I know a lot of people do the Estes method in different ways. You know, maybe they don't have access to the soundproof headphones. Maybe they only have, less expensive or just their ear pods or things like that. And that's okay, because when you formulate an experiment and you take into account variables and you take into account different ways that you can sort of put together these experiments, you can still make a very objective data set, whether or not you have the materials that people deem, appropriate for that method. And that's why it is, guys, I just found the Facebook comments. Why? Because we all know that like a toddler could probably be like, here's where these things are, you idiot. All right, so, hey, Jenny. Darlene, I know. I'm killing me too. Clayton's here. Melissa's here. Melissa, I am pretty sure that it's coming soon. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. I'm not trying to like ruin people's surprises. All right, so we're going to use the Estes method. So if you don't have a notebook, that's okay. I'm going to be writing this stuff down on my notebook, and then I can sort of post this framework in the comments of the live after it's done. I'm also working on getting all of the lives uploaded to YouTube, and then having a link to just the live talks on my hi Holly, access to the lives on my website, so that it's just an easy, you can get right there. You can look over the different talks that we've had on here. So that's coming in time too. All right, so let me get into a nice blank. Got it. All right, so we're doing the Estes method. So Estes. And now if we think about this in terms of Estes method, if you are not using the like noise canceling headphones and sort of like the method as it's laid out, then maybe just call it a spirit box experiment, or call it something like a sensory deprivation spirit box experiment. Because when we use terms, this is a side note, when we use terms like Estes method, when we use terms like REM pod, when we use terms like music box, there is no specification in what you're doing, selling, explaining. And if you know me well enough, you've heard me rant about the term music box in particular. But we want to be very specific when we're doing experiments. So when we use these terms that you wouldn't know what it is unless you're in the paranormal field, that kind of throws the objectivity out the window because we're relying on the audience's knowledge of the paranormal in order to decipher our data. Does that make sense? So even though, when I say we're going to be using the Estes method, that will make sense to all of you. If we're putting together a data set for like a journal paper or something that we're going to be submitting for some sort of peer review outside the paranormal, which is a really responsible thing to do when you're doing paranormal experiments, because the end result is for scientific purposes. If you are somebody who is interested in furthering the study, then you are going to want to prepare your data sets to be looked at by non-paranormal eyes. Because when we're only sharing our data with other paranormal people, we're kind of creating, this sort of like we're setting ourselves up for this kind of like fallacy of I talked about these last week, where it takes a certain group in order to understand it. And that is not really an inclusive data set. We want our data to be able to be looked at by non-paranormal people, and then they can easily understand what we're talking about without us having to explain, oh, the Estes method is this, that, and the other thing. Because then they're relying on trusting us. And that in and of itself creates this sort of fallacy conundrum when it comes to our data. So when you're setting up an experiment, specifically, not necessarily the scientific method, because like I said, scientific methods sometimes takes years to complete. Like the resonance chamber at Madison Seminary, that's a 2-year-long experiment that I'm basing on the scientific method. So that's something that's going to take years and years and years for me to get data for. If we just want to have a fun experiment where we can either share it in our presentations at events, or maybe you want to share it on your social media, or you want to share it in an environment where maybe not everybody's paranormal, I can promise you that it will seem so much more objective and credible and impressive if you're able to lay out your data in a way that does not need paranormal explanation. So when we say something like we're going to be using the Estes method, if you're not a paranormal person, I would have to explain that to you. So instead, maybe we're going to be doing a sensory deprivation radio wave experiment. People know what sensory deprivation is. That's not exclusive to the paranormal. People know what radios and radio waves are. That's not exclusive to the paranormal. And then you can explain an SB7 spirit box as a device that, what is the word I'm looking for? That switches rapidly through radio stations. And then that's something now that I can correct. Yeah, Phil. And also, hi. Yes, it creates a bias. So that's something that, because then I can, if it's things that only paranormal people understand, I can tweak my data to be more impressive to paranormal people. And that's not necessarily, it might be what we want, and that's fine. And if you're just here to have fun, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. These ways to tailor our experiments is specifically for people that want to present their data to non-paranormal people. And this is sort of a great way to do that. So we would say the SB7 spirit box. So we would lay out all of our things that we will be using. If we're using the Estes method, we call it something, or we explain it in a way that's easily accessible to all. So Estes method is going to be a sensory deprivation radio channeling experiment. And then we can also base that. This is based on the theory that otherwise unexplainable voices, possibly intelligent, can come through via radio waves. And Estes method does create a small amount of variables, but it's still very, very subjective because of the sort of trust that you're putting into the person that is listening to the radio stations. So that's why we can create this experiment using the 3 variables of experiments and create a data set that might be a little bit more compelling if you get the right kind of information from it. Who knows? Who knows? You only know if you do it. So I really, really encourage you. Again, the notes that I'm going to write, I will post. So if anybody wants to use this, I would be super interested if anybody does use this on their next investigation. Share what you found, and it's crazy. It's crazy to say this. I'm more impressed when people run experiments and they don't find anything their first try than when they do. When they do, sometimes it says to me like, oh, there may have been some confirmation bias in there. It's more impressive to me when you do an experiment 100 times and then there was one time that there was some like interesting data than if you run an experiment 100 times and 80 times you get interesting data. But that's neither here nor there. Because you have to do an experiment time and time and time and time and time again. And then when you get successful, you have to make sure that you are able to recreate that environment in the same way in order to change up some of the variables. So, okay, I digress again. I wish there was somebody here to be like, Lauren, move on. So we're going to be doing our pretend experiment layout with Estes method, or we're going to call it the sensory depth radio wave experiment. And then you can say, or Estes method experiment. Because it's also okay to make sure that you're teaching people. So, hey, so when I say sensory depth radio wave experiment, in the paranormal field, we call it the Estes method. Perfect. There we go. Check. Then you want to sort of write out the general idea behind the technique that you're using. Now, this is just because we're doing an experiment based on a technique. So if you're doing a different experiment, like on the last live, someone said a great experiment would be like temperature change with like different triggers on devices. So in that case, what you would do is you would explain the theory behind the devices that you're going to be using and measuring temperature change with. So for this, we would be explaining the theory behind the spirit box, because that's one of the tools that we're going to be using. So you'll lay out the tools that you're going to be using, and those tools are going to be considered our controlled variables, because those are going to be the constant and unchanging pieces of your experiment. So these are unchanging. This is the foundation of the experiment. So this is going to include. Now, unless you are experimenting with the method with like different types of spirit boxes or different types of headphones, or, but for the experiment that I want to lay out, I want to keep the sort of original method the exact same. So for that, my controlled variables are going to be the original SB7 spirit box. And next to that, what I would do is I would explain what that is and the paranormal theory behind it. Now, remember, when we're using equipment that was made for the paranormal, there is no scientific theory behind it. So we want to be very clear when we say the paranormal theory has nothing to do with science, because none of this stuff has been proven. The SB7 and other spirit box have never been proven with any scientific legitimacy. So be very careful when we are talking about things like that. the experiment that we're doing helps us to create a data set that has nothing to really do with verifying whether or not a spirit box works. So be careful when we're talking about the theories behind that. So the SB7 spirit box is it's a radio that rapidly changes the channels, and it is based on a paranormal theory that Siri, I wasn't saying Siri, I was saying theory. Goodness gracious. This paranormal theory that otherwise unexplainable voices or possibly intelligent phenomena will come through via radio waves. And what you'll notice in my language is I'm not saying spirits and I'm not saying ghosts, because again, those are not things that we can verify at all. Unexplainable voices, we can't necessarily verify, but sometimes that's, audio like pareidolia. But the theory behind it is that otherwise unexplainable voices can sometimes come through on radio waves, and they can line up with possibly, intelligent answers, things like that. So be as very sort of like non-biased as you can with your language when you're laying out what these pieces of equipment do. The second piece with our control variable is going to be whatever headphones you're using. So maybe you're using noise canceling headphones, which is preferred, but you can tailor an experiment to what you have access to. You could also tailor that method to no headphones. We did it at an event that I just did, Spirit and Science. So it is possible. I prefer without headphones because it takes away that trust factor. I could put headphones on somebody that I would trust with my life. I trust everything that comes out of their mouths. That does not mean that is objective data. It is to me, it might be to me personally, that's not objective data to share. No journal article says data is based on my dad giving me information because I trust him. That is not experimental data. It's not. Based on trustworthy team member, not experimental data. So if you are going to use headphones and things like that, you might want to add some other maybe control variables to the equation. Maybe a control variable is putting a mic inside the headphones, and things like that. I think another really great control variable, to be honest, ACG Paranormal out of Chicago, Nat and Elliot, use the, it just left me. What are those headphones called? The Lucid technique. So they will use Lucid headphones that not necessarily noise canceling, but they can kind of hear what is going on with the spirit box in like a room over. So it's kind of cool in order to do that. But then, they can also hear the questions that you're asking and things like that too. But there's a lot of different ways that you can create some different variables. So figure out what you want your variables to be. Be very specific and non-biased when you're explaining what your control variables are, because those are going to be the constant and unchanging variables of your experiment. So we have our spirit box. We explain what that is. We explain the theory behind it. We have our noise canceling headphones, because that's what we're going to be doing for the experiment that we're going to be talking about. And then we have maybe the person that we're putting the headphones on. So it's going to be Lauren, me. Now, of course, take into consideration that trust factor. So even though I am going to be a control variable, you can't necessarily completely control like what I'm saying. So we'll take that into account later on when we figure out our other variables. And then maybe we get really, really super into it and we have some other controls. Maybe we have another control variable is going to be the location that we do this at. So the location, maybe I have a specific personal chair that I'm going to be sitting in that I know doesn't creak, doesn't move around, anything like that. So maybe the chair that I'm sitting on, maybe we're going to make sure that we do this experiment all in one night. So the clothing that I'm wearing, because sometimes, clothing can make noise, things like that. So just getting as specific as possible with your controlled variables, because these are the things that are going to be completely unchanged about the experiment that you're running. So we have all of our control variables in place. And then I need to make, okay. And then the next one that we're going to do is is this one, the independent variables. So our control variables never change. That's the foundation of your experiment. And then there we go. Okay, now it's caught up. The independent variables are going to be the small things that you change in order to create a variation in your data. So we want to test if we can get similar, that's another thing, control variables, excuse me. And this was another thing that we used at the Spirit and Science event. And Jimmy, you guys were there. Maybe you have a list of already thought out questions that the person that is going to be having the headphones on has never seen those questions before, laid out questions. And we did at Spirit and Science, we did 3 historically valid questions, and then we did 3 random questions, and then we did 1 password question. And so maybe that other controlled variable is going to be the questions that you use, because it's going to be a great comparison by using the exact same question. So that's a big control variable. Having the questions typed out ahead of time and then bringing that into your experiment. That is a control variable that I just think really knocks, data out of the park. Really, really knocks it out of the park. And that's why it's so important to use noise canceling headphones. But like I said, I will have a little hack if you don't have access to noise canceling headphones. So we'll be on that. And it's something that I have tried and had some success with. So on to the independent variables. The independent variables are going to be the things that change that you are going to be comparing the results with. So you want to maybe have a time frame, 10 minutes per session. And I would do them consecutively, one after another. And time would be another controlled variable. So when we're working all of this out, you'll be like, oh, that's another thing that I want to make sure I control. Write it down. Independent variable I spelled variables wrong on that. Variables. The variables. Probably nobody noticed that, but now you do because I pointed it out. The variables. Right there. The variables. Maybe location of the experiment each time. So you do it like once in the basement. You do it. I know they were incredible. Once in the basement. Once in the attic, if the location has an attic. Once in the room that is rumored to have the most activity. Once in a room that is rumored to have 0 activity. So you lay out the places where you're going to do it, and then you figure out exactly like the amount of places. You have everything in place, and then the independent variable is going to be like location change. Very, very simple. So it's easier to have your independent variable be one thing that you change with experiment. That way you're going to have very clear data, and it's going to be much easier to compare the results, because then I'll have answers to 1, 2, 3, 4, knowing that everything else about the experiment was the exact same. And then that's just a very small amount of data that you can compare. And then it can sometimes be really, really interesting, and it can sometimes yield absolutely nothing. And that's okay. Do it a whole bunch of times. It's fine. Just make sure that you're doing it all together as a single, experiment, and you have all of your variables in place. So that's the independent variable. That is the one thing, preferably. Trust me, it gets really, really sticky. If you change multiple things, you just end up creating a lot of questions with not so many answers. And then your dependent variable. So your dependent variable is the outcome that depends on the independent variables. So that is the change. Oh, I lost my pen. That is the change or the different types of data that you get with the change in your independent variable. So your dependent variables are the results that you compare, right? So control variables, usually pretty long list, as specific as possible. If you're using paranormal language, break it down. If you can put theory in very objective terms, so not using things like dead people, ghosts, spirits, things like that. Instead of spirits, we say, you know, otherwise unexplainable phenomena, otherwise unexplainable, audible phenomena. Sometimes comes out as words, sometimes comes out as phrases, whatever. The more sort of like non-paranormal you can explain it, the better. And then your independent variable, which should be one thing that changes. And then your dependent variable is sort of the result. So you have control, foundation, and all of the materials. You have your independent, the one change that you're comparing the results to, and dependent is those results. So we go back to that Estes method. We say, all right, here's our control variables, Our independent variable is going to be the room in which we do this session in. 10 minutes long each, there we go. We're gonna have clear set of questions. Maybe I'm gonna do 5 different rooms in this location. So I'll have 5 different sheets of paper with my questions on it that I will jot down the answers to. Maybe, you know, another control is like you take the first word that comes within 10 seconds of each question, and you have a timer. You know, there's so many ways that we can add more controls that just make this more objective, more objective, more objective, more objective. So maybe you have a little timer and you say 10 seconds. Ask a question, boom, timer, 10 seconds. Whatever answer comes through in 10 seconds, even if it's multiple, they get jotted down. Boom, 10 seconds. On to the next question. And then once you get through to those questions, maybe you have a place for notes if there's some other things that come through. And try not to make connections. Try not to fill in space. This is a common GA trope where, like, it's really popular with things like the Oculus, like, or the Oculus, the Ovilus, like, lake comes in. And then they're immediately like, did you drown in a lake? That's such speculation. And that's such speculative data. When you assume because something comes through and then you attach it to something, that is confirmation bias. So if I ask something like, what year is it? And we get a response back that's like, orange. I'm not going to say, oh, oranges were really popular in 1845 and blah, 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 blah. So write down 1845. No, you write down orange. That's it. Even if it does not make sense. Don't try to make sense of the answers because at the end of the day, you don't know if you're talking to a person or if you're talking to a cloud of electrons that has no sentience whatsoever, or like you don't know, or nothing, or you're just talking to the confirmation bias of the person listening to the headphones, and this is all make-believe and pretend. Whether or not you believe it or not has nothing to do with your data. Personal belief should be completely left out of experiments. Confirmation bias should be left out of experiments, no matter what. You thinking that ghosts are real should be left out of your experiments. You thinking that spirits are dead people should be left out of your experiments. Wholeheartedly. Even if you are straight up psychic and you see old man Richard sitting there with his magical fingers talking into your spirit box, should be left out of the data. Only the things that we can show proof of, and proof is becoming so subjective in the paranormal too, but I'm talking concrete. We videotaped it, this word came through, everybody, you know, we wrote it down and then we did multiple times and that same word came through, because we're also using the interpretation of the person listening into the headphones too, so we have to take that into consideration as well. And then we switch to different rooms when we're doing it. We write down the data, exactly how it comes to our questions. And then we line those questions up and we see if there's any similarities. Maybe we say, this question, it took 5 seconds for something to come through. This question, it took 5 seconds for something to come through. That's interesting. Maybe the words don't make any sense. Who cares? That's a tiny little smidgen of something interesting. No assumptions, no nothing. That's interesting data. Maybe this question didn't get any answer. And the other 3 trials, that question also didn't get an answer. That's interesting data. And it's interesting data not based on the actual like verbal results that you're getting. The occurrence just becomes interesting. That's interesting data. And that's something too that you can videotape this whole scenario and you can have that. Like, okay, here's the data that we came up with this. We did this exact same thing. Everything was the exact same. We did it in 5 different areas of the location. This question, it took 5 seconds to get an answer. Answer didn't make sense, but it took 5 seconds in all the different rooms. This question never got an answer, and it didn't get an answer in any other locations with the 10-second time limit. This question took 3 seconds. It also took 3 seconds in all the other. Like that's really, really interesting. Doesn't prove that ghosts are real, doesn't prove anything, but it does show a pattern, and then you can ask more questions, and then you can create another experiment. And that's the whole thing behind this, sort of using variables to make experiments, is because you're able to see occurrences with a non-biased eye, and you are able to read the data in a way where you're not speculating and you're not inserting spirits, ghosts, dead people, Abraham Lincoln, demons, angels. You're not inserting any of that stuff because none of those things fit into control independent or dependent variables. They don't fit anywhere. So they have, and you can still do this experiment in the paranormal. It just gives you a new way to approach something that is otherwise so subjective. Y'all, if you have ever said the term, we like the science of the paranormal, and I'm telling you right now, I put a poll up and a lot of you said that you were so interested in learning the science and furthering the science of the paranormal. If you want to do that, I can't stress this enough. Stop using phrases like spirits. Stop assuming that ghosts are dead people. Stop making assumptions, even if you have psychics telling you things, even if you are gifted and you see the phenomena. If you've ever been in a talk when I've talked about neuroplasticity, our brains will input some things that we would prefer to see. And it doesn't always mean that what we see is the truth. So if you want to approach the paranormal with a science mind, stop making it into something that it has yet to be proven of. Stop saying ghosts. Stop saying spirits. Stop saying even entities. Start looking at it in a way where we can use these techniques and we can create data sets that are easily readable by paranormal and non-paranormal people alike. And we start to create this foundation that's not based on entertainment. And I know that can be a trigger for a lot of people. But if you're out there hunting ghosts, y'all, that's so deeply based on entertainment. That's entertainment. People are entertained and intrigued by the prospect of our mortality continuing on into the next life. And you can wholeheartedly believe that. And I'm saying that from a place where my mom passed away and I saw her on 2 different occasions with my eyeballs. And I felt like I was being communicated with by her. But I will say time and time again, I don't believe in ghosts. If I'm going to approach something scientifically, I cannot actively believe in ghosts while I'm experimenting. And you'll notice that that's also why if we're just doing something for entertainment purposes, yeah, I'll pull out the apps and we'll do cool meditation experiments and I'll say ghosts and I'll say spirits and all that stuff. But the second, and that's why, a lot of you that have either investigated with me or come to my events, I've never really truly seen the experimental side of me because it's boring. It's boring. Although I will say spirit and science, you guys saw a little bit of it because I made you sit. Made y'all sit with me, right? We didn't introduce ourselves. We didn't talk. You just had to sit. And a lot of you were like, that was actually so interesting and so cool. It was, it can be cool. Now, again, there are times where I just want to go to Madison Seminary and I just want to go sit in a spooky room and feel the crazy stuff. I just want to go to the Ohio State Reformatory and walk by something that I know is not there and just feel those goosebumps. That's not scientific because I'm not being scientific, Lauren, at that point. There's a reason why I'm in this industry and why I'm in this field. And I do, when people think that I'm a killjoy and when people think that I'm like being mean about not believing in stuff, it's because I love this field so much that I want people to take it seriously. And calling things, oh man, at some point I'll just get canceled for this. Calling things out as ghosts and spirits and dead people and just assuming that that's what paranormal activity is. It's demons, it's angels, it's spirits, it's entities, it's this, it's that, it's we have no proof of those things. We have no objective proof. And this is also from somebody who investigates closely with people who have gifts. And I do use people with gifts in my experimentation. I do, but they're not a part of my data unless I'm running a specific experiment on them, Holly. Creepy Holly. So when we go to one location and we talk about the ghosts there, we're inputting confirmation bias and you are being entertaining. Point blank. I'm so sorry. Put a Band-Aid on it. It's going to be okay. Because sometimes I do that at events because it's fun and it's interesting and it keeps me so interested and it keeps me engaged and it keeps other people engaged and it gets other people interested. This is the hard stuff. This is the difficult stuff. This is the stuff that isn't going to make good content. But this could possibly be the stuff that creates that little bit of interest in communities that think that we're stupid, in communities that think that, we're just playing pretend, in communities that indulge in the debunk culture, create objective data sets and you might be able to challenge those point of views, but do it in a way that is inclusive and non-biased and speaks in non-paranormal terms. And you might be able to create something just really cool. So, one more review. When we're doing an experiment and we want to take variables into play, which is going to make your experiments much more compelling in terms of data, it's going to show you're organized, it's going to keep you organized, and it's going to create some possibly nothing at first, but it could also blow your mind. And I'll tell you, if your first experiment just blows your mind right off the bat, you might need to go back to the drawing board a little bit and find some better controls because, this stuff isn't necessarily foolproof. And we do have to tame our confirmation bias. We really do. We have to tame it. And don't think that you're going to want to do this to like make content with because it's boring. Although I don't know though, because spirit and science, that wasn't boring at all, to me at least. That was really cool. That was kind of like a condensed version of all this. So if you didn't get to come to one of our spirit and science events with me and Sharice Williams, we're hoping to have some, at least one scheduled in 2025. It was such an incredible event and there was so much really cool information that we were able to do. And then that also brings me to some of the different variables that we can use. If you don't have access, specifically if you're doing ESTAs, if you're doing sensory deprivation, spirit box experiment, and you don't have noise canceling headphones, don't use words. Don't verbalize your questions. Have cue cards Or Sharice and I actually, I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. Sharice and I laid out all of the questions that we were going to ask, and we actually had 2 groups in 2 different spots in the location, and we used 2-way walkie-talkies, and we took turns reading the questions so that each space could hear the question via either walkie-talkie or your voice. Nobody had on headphones. Hi, Nikki. You can just rewatch it. You're fine. You're fine. You'd like this. You would like this. How's it going? And instead of anybody speaking, there was no speaking. We all wrote down what we thought we heard. And then we compared, compared information. And honestly, like, maybe there were some things that were like a little, like, oh, we had to make the connection in our heads. But to me, something that seems like it's a failed experiment is so much of a success. Because honestly, because we didn't get, exact answers for stuff, and like there was a little, like, some stuff that it intrigued me enough that I absolutely want to do that again. It was such a cool experiment. And so you can do, no talking out loud. Everybody just listens and they write down what they think it is, and then you don't share your results until the very, very end of the experiment when you come back together. Really cool. We also did what was called a password sort of queue before the event even started. Before anybody got there, we arrived at the location and we went to each floor and we told each floor 2 different passwords. A password from me and a password from Sharice. And then one of our questions was, what was the password that we said earlier in the evening? Also a really, really cool way. And we wrote down the passwords, we put them in a box, and we gave them to the owner so that we couldn't be like, oh my God, that was it. You got it. Woohoo. No, because he was holding the passwords in a box. We opened them up and we unfolded them and everybody could see the passwords. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can make experiments accessible dependent on what you have access to. And also, too, guys, I'm a message away, Not enough people watch these lives anyway. So like all 5 of you can message me if you ever have questions about how to formulate an experiment a little bit better. Or if you wanted, really, don't ask me to set one up for you. That's way too time consuming. But if you have one and you're like, can you give me your feedback on this? I might be like, oh, maybe you should change this. Maybe you should, explain why you're using this. And I'm happy to do that for you. But you have to share your results with me because I want to know. I'm so intrigued by it and it's great. I think that's it. Less than an hour, y'all. I'm on Facebook, so I can see the comments on Facebook. If anybody has any questions on Facebook, I don't think I can see. I don't know. I'm glad. I'm glad that I am live on TikTok. I can see on TikTok. Hi, Ricky. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, look, I can see who's on TikTok. This is great. We're talking about experiments in the paranormal and just better ways that we can put together variables and experiments. So if anybody has any questions, ask them now. That was a great, I'm going to be organizing these lives so that they are on my YouTube so that you have access to, did I just lose Facebook? No, here it is. So, okay, let's see. Megan, yes, it was such a cool event. Oh yeah. So no, absolutely, Nick. So Nick Simons from Netflix's 28 Days Haunted actually commented, made a great point on here. Good proof of this sort of like confirmation bias and not having all your variables in place would be to watch this particular show. If you're on Facebook, you can see what show it is. But the person that was under the session had his earphones like almost all the way off of his ears. So you could see his ears. So in that case, using a cue card with questions on it would be incredibly valuable there. And I did have a scenario at an investigation where the headphones were not sound sound dampening. So it was very clear, and how they were performing this Estes session was just more based on like, channeling, which is fine. However, whether or not somebody is channeling for their Estes is still deeply based on trust. Now the data depends on trusting that individual to not just be directly answering the questions that they're hearing. And while it's fine if you trust somebody that deeply, that's great. It does not make for good data to show somebody who doesn't know that person. Does not make for good data. It's not good data. So in that instance, I didn't have any cue cards. So I went behind the person and I held up fingers and I said, how many fingers am I holding up? And I did that on 2 times. How many fingers am I holding up? So they may have heard my question, but they had a 1 in 10 chance of guessing. And if you do that multiple times, 5, 6, 10 times, who knows? Maybe you have a tablet and you say, what number did I write down? You don't give them a 1 to 10, nothing. What word am I writing down? Then you have these visual cues. And then that also has to be something that you take into account. Visual questions were not answered correctly. Verbal questions were answered correctly. That skews some data. That could mean that your control variables are not in place and you might need to redo your experiment, because that tells me that maybe the person's hearing the questions, or maybe somebody asks a question in a different room or something like that. So there's a lot of ways. Go into an experiment trying to disprove things. Just try it. Not debunk. I don't love debunk culture. I really don't, because it's also just as unorganized as experiments are. There's like no rhyme or reason. They're just like, they don't take into account any of the variables. They just go, oh, that's this. I like to ask for my government name from the SB7. So that's now, that could be one of your questions. But then that's also really dependent on like subjectivity, unless you have some sort of document showcasing that and then you have other people that hear it. See what I'm saying? So if it's something based on knowledge that needs to be obtained in some otherworldly way, that might be a great way for you to know that yours is working. That's not data. Well, okay, everything's data. It's not data that should be included in an objective article or an objective data set. Asking for things that need some sort of intelligence that is not pertaining to something that is like written or visual or something that you can show checks and balances with turns into sort of like this subjective thing. So while that could be a great indicator for you to get things started, unless you have like your birth certificate being a part of your data set or something like that, or something that, but then again too, the people that are with you could also know the answer to that, and they could know that that's what you do. So while it's a great indicator for you personally, there are too many variables that could skew that sort of answer. I'm speaking directly to Nick on Facebook. I'm sorry if you're in a replay somewhere. He asked, I like to ask for my government name from the SB7 when I turn it on so I know the device is working. Things like that are great indicators. Yeah, I know, but you also, Nick, you have been on television. Like I said, great indicator for you personally. I told you, I'm going to be a killjoy when it comes to stuff, but I'm a killjoy because I think it's going to make data better, and it's not going to be dependent on like entertainment value stuff. Yeah, we still need to get together and do some more experiments. Okay, I digress. I'm going to be done. I'm done. I'm going to play my intro video for you. If you didn't see it, it's brand new. Please just stick around and just watch it because it's bonus. I will see you next Sunday. Usually these are bi-weekly, but this was just kind of like a little fun jump in. We'll talk about that later, Nick. It's not SD session. No, I know. No, that's what I'm saying. It's a great indicator for you. I ask personal things all the time to make sure things are working. I don't include it in my data sets though, because it's personal things are more subjective than not. I'm going to play my intro video for you as an outro because I want you to see it if you didn't see it before. So please stay and watch it. I will be back next week, and we are breaking down the tech of techniques next week. And some of y'all are going to love this. We're going to break down the flashlight method. We're going to break it down. Maybe we'll use the experiment with variables and controls and things like that. It's going to be a great way for maybe us to practice. So if you want some homework, if you're watching right now, if you want some homework, take the 3 variables. Control. Control, independent, and dependent. I'm going to have them in order next time too. Variables, and see if you can lay out those variables with the flashlight experiment. And then we're going to talk about it next week. We're going to break it down mechanically, how they work, things like that. A lot of really important things that you need to know when you're doing something like the flashlight experiment, because there are people that like hate it. And I find it so funny because they're the same people that like use paranormal equipment. And I'm just like, how are you going to hate on something and then like swear by cat balls? It's so funny to me. It makes me laugh. How are you going to hate the flashlight experiment but like use an ovilus? How are you going to hate the flashlight experiment and like use apps, or hate the flashlight experiment and use a proximity sensor? Sorry. Okay, I digress. But hopefully some of you will find a new interesting love for that method next week. So next week, noon, Sunday. I'm Lauren Huntz. I love you so much. Watch this video. It's brand new. It's so cool. Okay, bye.